Now the China angle to the world market story and to Jeffrey Brown.
For the past year and a half, James Fallows has been living in China and reporting on the vast economic and social changes there for The Atlantic magazine. His latest article, titled The $1.4 Trillion Question, looks at China's increasing ties to U.S. financial markets. Jim Fallows is back home for a visit and joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And it's quite a week to be here.
It certainly is.
How does what we've been seeing this week, all that volatility, look to the Chinese? What do they see?
Well, of course, I've been away for 4 days now, so my impressions may be out of date, but I think it's a very interesting change of mood for the Chinese. You know, China has terrible economic problems, as everybody knows. It has rich and poor, it has pollution problems, but there's been a very striking economic confidence, at least during the year and a half I've been there. The stock market has gone up and up and up. I think the Shanghai Exchange almost tripled in value during the time I was there. And so there's been a sense that everything could be managed in a positive way. And time and again I heard people say, oh yes, the stock market will keep going up all this year because of the Olympics or because it's a lucky year or whatever. So to have suddenly this experience with real financial markets and their ups and downs, I think is a certain loss of innocence.
Does it feel new to them? I mean, they're realizing how tied they are to these global markets.
Yeah, there had been a lot of discussion in the Chinese press over the last year of so-called decoupling. You know, America could have its problems, it could talk about its subprime crisis, but the Chinese investors thought they had so much momentum and they'd been careful enough in where they put their money that somehow this wouldn't spread and affect them. So it is, again, this loss of innocence.
This goes to your article, of course. I mean, explain in what ways they are tied, for example, to a subprime crisis here. Why do they feel it?
Well, there is kind of the immediate tie, which a lot of their investment vehicles, especially the People's Bank of China, now has probably $5 billion, I think is the latest estimate of their exposure to subprime loans. That's not a lot by American standards, but it's a lot more than they thought they had. In a larger sense, the mystery I tried to explain in this article is why is it that a country which is still on average so poor, where public schools have no heat, where people live in these kind of very impoverished circumstances, and you see, you know, people pulling ox carts along the street with their human power, why these people are sending Americans $1 billion every day in money for us to use. They're borrowing from them. I had a statistic that on average, every American owes somebody in China about $4,000.
All right, let's explain that. You call this the $1.4 trillion question. You just told me before we started it's up to $1.53 trillion. What does that amount of money represent?
This is essentially China's accumulated trade surpluses really over the last 5 or 6 years. That as we all know, China has a trade surplus with the U.S. They sell more stuff to us than we buy back. And the question is, what happens with those dollars?
The dollars that we send their way.
Yes.
What do they do with them?
The dollar that you give to Walmart and it makes its way to some kind of supplier in the south of China. I have a little voyage of a dollar story in there. And essentially what happens is the Chinese government, instead of doing what other governments would do, which is spending it internally on things its people need, or just exchanging it for other currency, it basically has been lending a lot of it back to the U.S., especially in Treasury notes in the U.S. stock market. It's kept American asset prices much higher than they would otherwise be, and American interest rates lower, but so they have been subsidizing us in kind of an invisible way for much of the last decade.
You give an example of a recent investment in the Blackstone Group, for example, which did not go well.
Indeed. I think the Blackstone may be about the best-known company, the best-known American company in China right now in a negative way, because a new China Investment Corporation, which has several $billion, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars that is investing in the U.S., this was its first big bet, and it went bad, and this has been discussed a lot in China.
So what's the answer? Why are they plowing all those dollars back to our markets or investments in U.S. companies?
Well, it's because the Chinese government, you know, all governments try to resolve conflicting pressures. The main conflict the Chinese government is trying to resolve is this one. On the one hand, they don't want the value of their currency to go up too high because they want to keep their factories going as, you know, as full bore as they can. They want to keep having jobs for these people pouring out of the countryside. In the countryside, they make $100 a year, let's say. In the factories, they make $100 a month, and so that's a big improvement. So by keeping the value of their currency relatively low, they can keep that export going. On the other hand, to do that, they have a variety of controls that they impose. They want to keep They essentially keep their interest rates low to keep the value of their currency down. On the other hand, they're worried about having too much inflation internally. They want to keep people employed but not have too much inflation. I described in the article the fine line between historically very rapid growth and disastrously inflationary growth. That's the line they're trying to walk right along, and so the main way they do this is try to park the extra spending power back in the U.S. rather than using it internally.
And the impact, you're saying, for us, for Americans, has been very positive.
It has been, we simply live a lot better than we otherwise would. And again, it's, I quote Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary and President of Harvard, as saying it is, from a distance, very strange, indeed more than strange, that a poor, young, dynamic country should be shipping to a rich, older, more established country about $1 billion every single day that they could use, but we are using. And so in almost every way that affects Americans, we have been living better because of the money they're sending us.
But is there, because I remember talking to you back in the late 80s when you were reporting on Japan, and then we were worried about Japan buying America. This is different?
It is quite different. It's different because, in a way, the Chinese have learned from what happened with the Japanese. Their new investment corporation is studying carefully the role of other sort of sovereign wealth funds, and the Japanese example too. And they know the Japanese encountered severe backlash because the Japanese were buying trophy properties. They were buying Rockefeller Center. They were buying the Pebble Beach Golf Course. Those investments didn't turn out so well, but they created a lot of backlash in the U.S. So the Chinese are trying to do it as sort of quietly as they can, putting it in Treasury notes, being the second or third investor in an organization. When they went into Blackstone, even though so far it's been a losing investment, they tried to buy only non-voting shares, and only a small share of it because they wanted to sort of soft pedal their way.
But one of the key points now that I take from your article now is that you're saying that the average Chinese citizen is beginning to realize what's going on and realizing that they may not be getting all the benefits of the trade imbalance.
The Blackstone investment has caused a lot of discussion inside China. It's been mainly at elite levels. You don't find peasants out in the countryside saying, oh, this Blackstone, they've taken our money. Our latest harvest went to Blackstone. But university students and people in the cities do know about this. And so the question is it somehow, have we been giving the Americans even more money just to amuse themselves with? Have we been getting big paydays for these CEOs? Although, interestingly, I think the main tension inside China, as the markets have become volatile, is against their own government, because of this assumption that the government will be able to provide for people.
Is there a growing sense of their economic and financial power vis-a-vis the U.S. because of these dollars that they control?
There is some of that, but I think, interestingly, less than Americans would assume. We often talk about China as the rising superpower, and we talk about their leverage, and they have an X and Y and Z role. I think there's much more internal focus inside China, and I think fewer people talk about the leverage they might have over the U.S. than we seem to discuss here, which is interesting to me.
But how much danger is there, discussed there, or you talk to people back here, of them stopping investing all those dollars, and what impact would it have on our markets?
There's an interesting analogy to the situation of the Cold War. Again, I quoted Larry Summers as saying, during the Cold War, we had a balance of terror between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, where neither side would attack the others with nuclear weapons because of the certainty that both sides would be destroyed. There's something a little bit similar now with the financial balance. China has been financing us to an extraordinary degree over the last decade. It would hurt them to stop doing that because so much of their wealth is held in dollars. And if they pulled it out and ran down the value of the dollar very dramatically, they would be hurt. Their assets would evaporate. But so the question is, this is a bargain that works out well as long as both sides believe in it, but it's fundamentally unstable if there's some kind of shock.
But you mean they rely on us, obviously. I mean, they rely on our economic growth to buy their products.
We are the main customers, and I think 6 months ago, if you'd asked people in China, they could say, well, the U.S. might struggle and suffer, but still will be fine, because on the whole, they sell more collectively to Europe than they do to the U.S. now. But I think the turmoil of the last month has brought home to China again the fact that there is this kind of mutual vulnerability. The American market fluctuations can affect them too.
How much do you feel this among average people, to the extent you're able to get around? I mean, even on last night's program, when we were talking about the volatility in the markets, and I interviewed a couple of investment advisors, because so many Americans are in the market through 401ks. Is there something analogous to that, or is there a growing sense of being part of this global market?
Well, there's a growing sense of being part of financial markets, and it was remarkable during the last year when my wife and I were living in Shanghai, where little investment investment parlors were opening up every place, and you'd see these people bringing in their handfuls of dirty money and money they'd brought out of the literally out of the mattress, and putting their shares into China Telecom or the China, whatever the bank was. And so there's been a huge surge in the number of small Chinese people who borrowed money even to put it into the stock market. So I think there's a lot of pain right now by just unsophisticated small investors who thought this was the way to get rich very quickly.
Right. Well, that's my last question here. I mean, back to the turmoil.
Yeah.
For them, this is the first time, the first experience of that.
It certainly is. I mean, Chinese people in general are very shrewd commercial people, but there's not been real exposure to financial markets, the kind that we've been used to over the shocks of the last 20 or 25 years. So I think we'll see how this awakening and this introduction sets into China now.
All right. James Fallows of the Atlantic Magazine. Thanks.
Thank you.